Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you as always courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. I'm honored today to welcome to the show Dr. Marilyn Schlitz. Dr. Marilyn Schlitz is a social anthropologist, researcher, and writer, and is currently the founder and CEO of Worldview Enterprises. She also serves as president emeritus and a senior fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. She is a leader in the field of consciousness studies. Her research and extensive publications focus on personal and social transformation, extended human capacities, and of course, mind-body medicine. She is the author of several books, including Living Deeply, and the producer of the film Death Makes Life Possible with Deepak Chopra. Dr. Marilyn Schlitz, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to have you on the show. I wanted to dive a little bit into your field of research, and I love a quote that I found on your website. You're quoted as saying that consciousness is the next paradigm shift. And this can obviously entail a lot, but I was wondering if you can kind of explain to our listeners what exactly you mean by that.
Well, I think the major focus of the Western civilization for the last 400, 500 years has really been about reality as something out there, something that we can objectify and measure, manipulate, control. And I think that people are more and more becoming aware that the paradigm shift is really about inner space and the nature of our human potentials, the qualities within us. And that as we seek to find solutions to a lot of the global challenges that we face, it isn't going to come from outside of us, but really a deep examination of our own consciousness, our worldviews, our belief systems, and how it is that the source of many problems comes from within us and not outside.
Wonderful. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your background of how you first came to be involved with this exploration and doing research into this inner space, this idea of changing our focus from the outside world to the inside world.
Yeah, I think I've always had an interest if I, look back, but in terms of the kind of academic pursuit or my professional development, it started really as an undergrad at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, and I was really frustrated with the nature of the social order. This was in the 70s, and Detroit was at war with itself. I mean, the nation was at war with itself, and it was a race war, a class war, a gender war, and ultimately a paradigm war. It was really, a time when people were reflecting on their assumptions and on, what gave them meaning and purpose. And so I felt, fairly impotent at that point about, my capacities to make an impact or to change things. And then as an undergrad, I discovered two books that really changed my life. One was called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. And in it, he talked about how our worldview, our model of reality, isn't fixed or absolute, and that, in fact, if you look at history, it has changed periodically over time. So the very model that we hold as absolute or true is in many ways arbitrary and capable of transitioning. And so that was very exciting to me, the idea that we were living in a paradigm, that paradigm had the capacity to change, and that looking particularly at the revolutions that had happened in science, that we really could make a difference. And so then the second book that I discovered was by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, called Psychic Exploration. And in that book, it was an edited collection that was representative of scientists and scholars from a variety of different traditions and disciplines. And it was very interesting to me to see that these serious-minded people were looking at these capacities for psychic phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and doing it in a way that was very rigorous and with discernment, taking it seriously. And to me, that reflected a kind of paradigm shift. It was a movement that could revolutionize our understanding of who we are and, the nature of science, the nature of reality, all of that. And so that book really set me on an odyssey, and I began doing research in different laboratories. I went and worked with Robert Morris out in California, took a year of serious research methodology classes with him, as well as my other undergrad requirements. And then I went and worked at the Institute for Parapsychology in Durham, North Carolina for 3 years, the Mind Science Foundation in San Antonio, Texas, most recently the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California, and in all those places really finding a safe haven to explore these kind of renegade ideas and to contribute to the paradigm shift.
Right. Absolutely. That's wonderful. And you mentioned that kind of historically this has been something that's kind of been this renegade field of research. And as you've dove deeper and deeper into it and dedicated your life's work to bringing more to light about this, do you feel like there is more of an acceptance of it, and this is definitely the future that we're headed into, this idea of everything not being so objective and exploring these kind of inner realms of what it means, what our reality is and what it means to be human?
Well, I think we are living in the middle of a paradigm shift, and I think a lot of things point to that. But I don't know that I think, we're losing that sense of the objective. And in fact, if you track what's happening in science today, neuroscience, artificial intelligence, molecular biology, all of those are very much, grounded in the materialist model. At the same time, I think there's more and more curiosity and interest in these human capacities that suggest we're more than just physical, and that imply a kind of broader worldview, broader frame of reference. So you'll see that, in the popular culture, there's tremendous interest in these, capacities, our own intuitive capacities. And we see that, things like mindfulness meditation has become very mainstream. It wasn't at all, 10, 15 years ago, but it's, on the front page of the Harvard, Law Review now. It's just everywhere. So that's a very exciting development, and, there have been many research studies that are showing the benefits of contemplative practice, mindfulness practices, on everything from, stress reduction to better, grades for students in schools. I just read something today that, kids in 5th and 6th grade who are studying mindfulness actually get better math scores. So, there's all kinds of developments that are happening that suggest some shifts in our understanding of what's important and what gives us meaning.
Right, absolutely. And all these topics that you talk about, and as they're coming more to light, we do talk about it as it being this new kind of movement, this new paradigm shift. I found it fascinating as Edgar Cayce was bringing up all this stuff in his reading in the early 20th century, the first half. What connections have you found in particular with what you found in your research and what Cayce, the principles that he had brought up in his readings?
Well, I think Edgar Cayce is a great example of someone who was really, developing his own inner awareness and exploring the ways in which his consciousness seemed to connect to a broader set of possibilities, a broader sphere of reality. And, by harnessing his own intuition, his own inner knowing, he was able to gain insights about human development, about human personality, about health and well-being, things that today seem much more common sense, were pretty foreign at the time when he was, doing his work and making such an impact.
Right, absolutely. And I was wondering, for somebody who may be struggling to see and feel this paradigm shift that's taking place, what advice would you give them to kind of become more aware of what's going on and what's out there?
I done a lot of research on worldview transformation or consciousness transformation and how it is that we can move from, a limited set of possibilities to something that is broader. And in the course of that research, we've interviewed masters from different world traditions, done survey data, and developed a change model that is basically derived from what I will call noetic experiences. Noetic means states of insight, unplumbed by the discursive intellect, all inarticulate though they remain, and yet they carry with them a curious sense of authority. They're, our deep intuition. And what we're finding is that as people become more self-reflective, as they can take time away from the busyness of our, rapid society and all of the information that's bombarding us, the weapons of mass distraction that we face every day, as we can begin to find places of quiet, we can begin to look at these inner experiences and inner awareness, these noetic ways of knowing. For many people, there's, the possibility that we just ignore it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit within the materialist culture, and so people deny these openings. But if people can begin to breathe into it and to reflect on it, there are many different kinds of experiences that people report, whether they're near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, these kind of exalted states of consciousness, the epiphanies that people have. But oftentimes it's also out of pain and suffering that people are called to change, called to transform. So, the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, the, some kind of health episode that disrupts the steady state. All of these can be catalysts for our ability to transform our consciousness and to see things from a broader frame of possibility. And then, if people choose, they can begin to explore these things. They can look into themselves. They can listen to programs like this where, they encounter ideas that support this kind of expanded model of reality. And then building practices, finding ways that we can, use the insights that come from these noetic experiences to build new habits, new practices, new ways of being in the world. And these kinds of practices involve kind of 5 qualities. They involve setting intention, bringing that sense of intent to change, to have positive experiences, to grow. But we know that intention alone isn't enough, and, the old adage, the road to hell is paved with good intention. So we need to do more than simply intend, but intention is a fundamental first step. And then attention. We know that these transformative practices involve shifting our perspective, the place where we focus our awareness. And so different kinds of meditation practices, even, simple things, walking in nature or gardening, reading, taking a bath, and just being quiet can allow us to shift our awareness from, the external world to more of our own inner space. It can also shift us from seeing the glass as half empty to the glass as half full. So it's where we place our attention. We know from the cognitive neurosciences that there's something called inattentional blindness, that our society gives us sort of these frameworks for what we expect to see about the nature of reality. And if we aren't open, then all we see is what we expect to see, when in fact a lot of other things are going on. And so these transformative practices can help us to expand our possibilities so that we're able to see in a more expanded way. A third element of these transformative practices is repetition. So again, from the neurosciences, we know that our brains lay down these neural pathways, and that these pathways become, stronger as we practice them. And if they're bad habits, then those become stronger. But if they're something that we want to live into, if we want to create new habits, then we need to create new practices that will allow us to develop new neural pathways and what they call neuroplasticity, the idea that we can really change the functioning and structures of our brain so that we are open to new possibilities. The fourth piece is guidance. People, take important direction from trusted teachers who've been on the path before us, or, the Edgar Cayce readings are very inspirational for a lot of people, and, having the opportunity to have somebody like Edgar Cayce who, was able to lead the way, and so learning from a trusted teacher. But it's also about inner guidance, and again, going back to these noetic insights, how is it that we can, begin to really harness these qualities that come from within us and create trusted messages and insights? The fifth thing is really more about acceptance. Transformation is really about our perceptions of the world and our reactions to the world. It's not so much that the physical world is changing, but our ability to respond to it. And so becoming less reactive, becoming less defensive, becoming more curious and open, all become ways in which we can dive into this kind of consciousness transformation. And ultimately, I think our own inner work, this process of our own development, can then be reflected in the outer world. We can bring these qualities to our work and to our families, to our communities, to the political and economic structures that we're embedded in. So I think that it's kind of like a fractal, and as we do our own work, as we transform our own consciousness and our awareness, we can also begin to transform the society we live in, so that we're moving from our own inner experience to something that has greater harmony with the outer world.
Right. Wow, that was wonderful. Thank you. Very beautifully put. I appreciate that. You touched on a number of things there. I kind of want to talk about what within your most recent research and kind of the social movement, the things that are going on that you see around you, is really most inspiring you as where you stand today.
Well, the work I'm most involved in right now is about redefining death and a campaign to transform fear into an inspiration for living and dying well. I've just completed a feature-length documentary called Death Makes Life Possible that I did in partnership with Deepak Chopra. And it's a source of inspiration for people as they're thinking about their own mortality, thinking about what comes up for them when they think about their own mortality, and how it is that as we explore consciousness and think about our human potentials as something more than just our embodiment, that becomes a liberation for people and can really help them shift from fear into inspiration. And then I have a book that will be coming out in May with the same title, Death Makes Life Possible, that is a kind of a deeper dive into what is known as terror management theory. Ernest Becker was an anthropologist who was really interested in, the denial of death and how that denial can lead to very pathological types of behaviors. And so how is it that we can, in a positive, life-affirming, supportive way, begin to understand what is our worldview around death and what is it that we think will happen next, and how is that supported or refuted by different cultures and different systems or cosmologies? How is it that learning and appreciating different cultures and their approach to death and the afterlife can really become a very affirming practice? So that's what I've been diving into, and I like to think about death awareness for peace, that as we become more resilient, as we become more aware of what's happening inside us, where are there places of fear, and how can we address those and how can we, live more fully, knowing that we are mortal and that we will eventually die, and that there are qualities and capacities that we can develop, these kind of transformative practices around death awareness that can lead people to be happier and healthier, better citizens.
Right.
So that's really the major work I'm interested in now. I'm creating some educational programs around death awareness. We're right now doing a 10-part pilot program with retirement communities, inviting people to watch the film, and then we have little discussions and prompts, questions that can help people to explore with each other. What do they believe? What have they experienced? And how does that expand our understanding of our human potential?
Oh, wow. Wonderful. And from what I understand, you will be a feature presenter at the upcoming ARE conference. And I understand that your presentation will be kind of exactly that you talked about, where you'll be showing the film and then you'll have a discussion, kind of Q&A, and just discuss about what everybody's idea and experience of death is. And what do you hope conference attendees take away from this experience?
Well, I think just having a safe space to have the conversation. There is something really welling up in society today around this. I think it's probably in part a demographic catalyst, where we look at the boomers now coming into retirement age, dealing with aging parents, aging spouses, siblings, really having to confront mortality in a way that we haven't, and being boomers, wanting to do it differently. And so we're seeing many threads of awareness changing around this topic. We have the Conversation Project, where there's a movement to start conversations with our loved ones around advance directives and sort of the physical aspects of what happens at the point of death. How do we make sure that our families are not left in a difficult situation, making decisions for us at the end of life that we didn't want to have made? So that's a really important thing, raising awareness around our own physical aspects of confronting mortality. There's also, this Death Cafe movement, where people are coming together in an unstructured way to have deep and meaningful conversations about their own life experiences, and where are their fears, where are their hopes, where are their possibilities. And so I think the Death Makes Life Possible project is contributing to a larger movement that is bringing a deeper awareness around both what is working in our society around death, as well as what isn't, and how is it that we have within us the capacities to make positive changes. So that's what I'm hoping to talk about, and I think to the extent people feel they want to share their own personal experiences, certainly in the context of the ARE, I think we have the freedom to talk about things like out-of-body experiences, experiences where people have the sense that their consciousness is beyond their brains and bodies, and what were those experiences like, and what kind of insights came from those experiences. Near-death experiences are very widely reported, and again, there seems to be a shift happening in our culture where, you can look at what are the books on the top of the bestseller list, and we see that there's a fascination with these kinds of experiences that, people report, that they have, contact with people from the other side and conversations. How do these experiences inform our sense of grief, loss? How is it that we can empower ourselves to, feel reassured that when somebody dies, that it's not the end of our relationship. It's a change, a transformation in our relationship, but there is this kind of continuity of consciousness that connects us. And so, as Deepak Chopra likes to say, this film the book is for anyone who's going to die, and that's a pretty big demographic. So
Right.
there we are.
Absolutely. Sounds like a wonderful project. I look forward to seeing it myself. I want to talk a little bit about, you raised many ideas about how this idea of death and how uncomfortable it is for many people in the West and kind of this fear that we have surrounding it. It seems, based on my research, that in the East, this isn't quite such an issue, and that they understand and embrace the idea of death, whether it's through their philosophy or their experience, the paradigm that they're raised in, their personal worldview. Why do you think it is that they have this kind of better understanding, more level of comfortability with death, whereas in the West we have this general fear about it and this general misunderstanding? It's kind of a taboo subject, I guess you'd say.
Well, it is taboo, and I actually think that it isn't quite as liberated in Asia as we might like to think. It's easy to kind of draw these divisions between Eastern culture and Western culture, but today it is really a global civilization, and things that are influencing people in the West are also influencing people in the East, North and South. I mean, it's everywhere. This past year, I had the opportunity to travel to Taiwan. Before that, I was in China. I'll be going to Japan. There's a strong interest in bringing this kind of death awareness conversation into the culture. I just had an email today from a woman who's translating the film into Japanese, and she's a physician who is very concerned about the kind of maladaptive behaviors that arise when people don't deal with their own mortality. But from a more appreciative perspective, then in the Eastern culture there has been more emphasis on inner experience, and in Buddhism, for example, the idea that there is this consciousness that is everything. It is the ground of being, and so our own individuated self is just an aspect of that larger sense of interconnectedness. And so I think that there has been more opportunity to reflect on our inner experience. There are, religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, that hold that when we die, something lives on. The notion of reincarnation. In Christianity, we have the idea of the resurrection, that there is this possibility that our soul has these potentials beyond our physical being. And I think that in Western science, which is really about the external objective world, there is an opening there as well, where we're discovering from developments in systems biology or in quantum mechanics that there is something interconnected. And rather than, fixating on the elementary particles of matter and, trying to find the material explanation for life, more and more we're beginning to see that it isn't about an elementary particle. It's really about the relationship between the parts, and that there is something greater, something interconnected. And science is beginning to establish that. So there is, I think, a paradigm shift that's happening where, the insights that came from these Eastern spiritual traditions are merging with the kind of utility of Western-based science. And I think out of that is something that hasn't yet been fully understood, but is, imminent and potential for all of us. In my book, Death Makes Life Possible, I sort of end with 2 chapters, one on the transformation that's happening in science as, we become more curious and we develop tools and methodologies that allow us to explore these inner experiences. And then a transformation that is required at a social level where, we really do need to reconsider what's happening in terms of things like organized medicine, where there's, been such an emphasis on, the physical heroic measures that have often caused a lot of suffering for people. So I think as we begin to build bridges between the inner and the outer, the physical and the immaterial, the spiritual and the scientific, as we begin to recognize that they're not polar opposites, but really complementary aspects of an interconnected whole, I think that begins to shift our model of possibility, and that's a very exciting time to be living in.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you put it very beautifully, so thank you. I want to talk a lot more about this. That some of the topics that you've raised are just incredibly inspiring for where we're headed in the future and where we stand right now. But we need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to talk more with Dr. Marilyn Schlitz here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Joining me today is Dr. Marilyn Schlitz, and we were talking about a number of things kind of involved in this paradigm shift that we've been discussing. Dr. Schlitz, I'd like to talk a little bit about one thing that we touched on, and it's this idea of the blending of spiritual traditions, ancient spiritual traditions, and kind of what's coming out in the forefront of science these days. You talk quite a bit about it in your book, Living Deeply, and I was wondering if you can kind of address what's happening right now that's kind of unique to this time, this blending of knowledge.
Well, you think about something like the science of meditation, and 20 years ago, it was really the domain of a group of granola-eating hippies in Northern California. And now it is in the leading laboratories across the world and in medical centers, being integrated into public health programs where people are learning more and more about the potentials of mindfulness. Dean Ornish is a physician and also a spiritual practitioner, and he talks about how, the yogis and the swamis and the spiritual teachers didn't develop these meditation practices in order to do better in a boardroom or have less stress and anxiety in our lives. It was really about tools for enlightenment. And I think that, we have, in our Western way, kind of pulled those pieces that have the most utilitarian aspects, but have not totally begun to integrate the spiritual aspects. And so how is it that we can benefit from stress reduction and centering, mindfulness, all of these practices? How can we benefit? And also, how can we become enlightened? How is it that we can harness our capacities in order to reduce the suffering that people experience? And so I think that, that's a really great area to explore, to recognize that, there are many opportunities for us as we dig more deeply into our own capacities, the qualities, the skills, the creativity that is inherent in us. And as we can develop more respect for our inner landscape, I think that will help us to become more, more enlightened, to work toward that capacity to reduce the suffering that comes when we live in a culture that is so completely focused on the physical, material aspects.
Right. And when you raise the idea of suffering, this, of course, makes us think of kind of the medical community and how the paradigm shift that we're experiencing is playing itself out within that field. And I know you have a thorough background into research into the idea of healing, which I want to talk a little bit about that because to me, it seems like healing has kind of taken the forefront in the medical field, whereas maybe more traditionally it was kind of based upon diagnoses and treatments rather than this idea of healing and maybe the body's kind of ability to heal itself. And also you have some wonderful research. I was wondering if you can touch on into kind of parapsychology and the ideal of the idea of healing other people, whether it's through non-locality or using the kind of the power of the mind to affect human physiology. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your research into that and kind of its implications for us today.
Right. Well, I think that's another example of how the culture is changing. There has been, a renaissance around people's acceptance of, of healing and the qualities that come when we think about the restoration of wholeness, which is really what healing is about. So there is this idea of curing, which, we, in the best world possible, we want everyone to be optimally healthy. And so, Western medicine has developed tools for helping to cure diseases and illnesses. But there's also this idea that, there is always going to be the final outcome, which is death. And so you can't cure that, but you can heal that. You can heal our relationship to death so that becomes a different kind of end game, a different kind of output. So I think that, healing our connection to ourself, healing the split between our minds and bodies is really important, and there's been a lot of work done in that domain. I think healing our relationships, recognizing that, it's hard to be healthy in a sick society. That was a quote from Ivan Illich, who was really, a medical deconstructionist. He was really interested in recognizing that a lot of the problems that we face in terms of health and health care, comes from the system itself. The idea of iatrogenic illness that's introduced by the process of organized medicine. Whether it's an infection that you get when you go to the hospital or some kind of complication that happens as a result of a surgery. All of these things speak to the challenges of that kind of external model. So, I think also healing our relationship to our environment, recognizing that a lot of the toxicity in the upper atmosphere comes when, they're burning the plastics and the chemicals in the medical centers, pumping it up through these tall chimneys into the upper atmosphere. It then rains down on the crops, and it goes into the food, and it goes into the mother's breast milk, and you have this kind of vicious cycle. And so as we can heal our relationship to nature, recognizing again that it's not about an objective world out there, but as we begin to transform our consciousness and our worldview to see the interconnectedness of all things, we can begin to heal that relationship and heal the organizations that are creating the kinds of problems that we see at the environmental level. And I also think there's a way in which we need to heal our relationship to the sacred and to that sense of the transcendent, something bigger than ourselves. We know that people who are involved in religious and spiritual practice are healthier on average. They live longer. They have better qualities of life. They're happier. And so what is it about our sense of connection? It can be being part of a spiritual community that helps us to feel more whole. But it is also the sense that we're part of something bigger and that there is some meaning system in the universe and that we're part of that. Maybe we're the sense organs for, the evolving universe, and that there's a kind of feedback, an interconnectedness that happens. And so I think that, healing is something that is about, that process in biology of self-correction. But it's also bigger than that. It's healing at a kind of meta level, at an integral level, where it's all of the parts coming together in a seamless whole that allows us to feel that sense of integrity that's so important. And I think that, that shift from the emphasis on heroic measures at the end of life to a natural progression, a healing of the inevitability of our mortality, is gaining momentum. And I think it's something that ultimately, conversations like we're having right now become so fruitful in helping us to feel validated when we think about these things. We're not alone. And, people who have these experiences like near death or out of body, reincarnation, mediumship, all of these things that, were part of the conversation around Edgar Cayce's work, become more validated, and people feel less marginalized when we know that there's a community that supports these kind of curious explorations.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about something that I've experienced recently with kind of people reaching out to me about this idea of, how do you develop the sacred in your life? How do you pursue something like meditation? And I'm wondering, why do you think so many people have difficulties in kind of embracing this and kind of, I have many people who come to me and they talk about, wanting to try meditation, but they just have this block, whether it's some mental block, they say they can't stop their mind from thinking. What have you found as a researcher is what's creating this kind of struggle that people have whether it's meditation or just finding some other meditative practice?
Well, I think that, again, culture creates habits, and habits lay down these, practices and patterns in our brains and bodies. And so they're hard to recalibrate. It does take effort. It takes sort of effortless effort, if that makes any sense. People have to build new practices so that those become their habits. And that requires, time and continuous work. But it doesn't all need to be about meditation. There can be, the idea that we simply just turn off the TV, turn off the radio, and feel comfort in silence. And the more people can find that silence is something that is renewing and life-supporting, the less anxiety they'll feel. I think that's really important. People are bombarded with these bad messages, scary messages all the time. And if we're, creating these kinds of feedback loops that cause this anxiety, it's very hard to switch out of that. So, people can do different things. They can find time in nature. It's a simple thing, but it can be very powerful. Within the Christian tradition, contemplative prayer, finding a space where there is a kind of mindfulness around that sense of connection to something bigger. We can work in our gardens. I'm a big gardener, and, being able to just take time out to watch the natural cycle of life, to participate in it, growing seeds into, beautiful food is an amazing process. And if we can, foster that kind of curious mind, that inquisitive space within ourselves, that can become a transformative practice. So I really think it is about, these qualities of intention, attention, repetition, guidance, and acceptance that become really important for us. And it really, helps to have a supportive community that we can talk with, and we can, on those days when it's not working, when somebody comes to you and expresses their frustration or their concern, to have you there to listen to them in a non-judgmental way is very powerful. And so I think that, again, a program like this that you're leading becomes a very useful sangha for people to come together and to share both their frustrations as well as the victories that come when we, have a moment of clarity and insight and epiphany. They're all very beautiful, and the more we have them, the more we can have them. And so it becomes a beautiful feedback loop. So, not to give up, to keep trying and keep engaging is what I would say.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you. And your message and your life's work and all the research that you've done and what you've brought to light is incredibly inspiring. So I thank you for that. But I'm curious, as you look forward into the future, what kind of are you what do you see? Where do you see us headed in the future? What do you see as this paradigm shift we're so deeply ingrained in continues to play itself out? What message of hope do you have for maybe our listeners?
Well, I mean, I don't know where it's heading. I can't say, and I don't know that anybody can say. We're at a crossroads, and on one hand, it's very frightening to see what's going on with the kind of intolerance that is characterized by the global conflicts. One of the things that I think, and again, this death awareness for peace, in the terror management theory literature, what we see is that people who are denying their own mortality and who then get triggered, they get these prompts, these death awareness prompts come, but if they don't have the emotional maturity or the spiritual maturity to deal with it, they can become very defensive. And what happens in study after study is that people become very protective of their in-group and very defensive toward the out-group. And so, we see the kind of religious conflict, for example, where there's intolerance becomes, violence. So the work that I aspire to is really helping people to make peace with their own, inevitable transition, and to honor the nature of our consciousness, to develop these kinds of tools and inner technologies that will allow us to, find places of peace and healing in our lives. So, it's consciousness, transformation, and healing that go together and can help us to become better citizens, more capable of appreciating the common qualities that we share across traditions, across, faith, across discipline, across race, across ethnicity. We are all the same basic makeup. And I also think that's true in terms of our relationship with the animal world. There's so much, violence against animals, and we see them as different from ourselves. But again, as we begin to heal that separation and find the sources of interconnectedness, we can become a more peace-inclined species. And, that's what I see as the hopeful message, is that we're going to wake up and we're going to become more enlightened, and we're going to support one another in that exploration so that, we can build together something that will ultimately be good for our children and our children's children's children.
Absolutely. And this very much leads into one of your more recent projects. I just want to touch on real quickly this project, the Worldview Explorations Project. And I love this because it's truly pioneering, but it's also something that I think is very much needed in the time that we're in, because all this that we've been talking about how we do share this fundamental connectedness, it's absolutely essential for us moving into a hopeful future and understanding where we stand right now. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how this project came about and the results that you've gathered from this project.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, we spent about 10 years doing this research on worldview transformation and wrote the book, Living Deeply, The Art and Science of Transformation. And at the end of that process, I just kind of sat back and had a moment of gratitude that it was completed and was good work. And my son at that point was a Cub Scout, and they had an About God requirement. And I looked at the requirement, and I felt it just wasn't how I wanted to introduce this topic. And so I went to the Scoutmaster and I said, what if I led my son through a variety of different world traditions instead of just one, and allowed him to appreciate the diversity. And the Scoutmaster said, well, that's great, but would you do it for the whole den? And I said, well, okay, but the parents would need to give permission, because religion is obviously tender for people. And 100% of the parents said yes, and one woman even said, "Can I bring my mother?" So we had, 3 generations of people participating. And it was such a beautiful experience to watch these young men, young boys at that time, just light up when they got a sense that, a spiritual practitioner from the Islamic tradition was a good person. It was just as simple as that they could see this person for their humanity rather than from all the bias and prejudice that we hear about. And so that got me started, and I ended up in some classrooms, and one day one of our donors came and said, I really think it's time for us to take this into the public schools. And so we spent a couple of years developing a curriculum that would help students to understand that they have a worldview, and that worldview influences everything about what they perceive, and it filters everything. And that other people have other worldviews that also filter their experiences. And so learning to treat this worldview as a kind of literacy, something we can learn about, we can teach, we can share with one another, became, a catalyst then for bringing the program into schools. And seeing that actually last night I dreamed about this, really beginning to rewrite the curriculum for business, because we see in business that there is a global marketplace, there is a workforce that represent many different traditions, and that it's really powerful to have this set of tools that allow us to appreciate worldview, to understand how we can engage others whose worldviews are fundamentally different from our own, with respect, with appreciation, with collaboration, and that ultimately that influences what we take out into the world. And so creating better social institutions, creating better ways of engaging one another. And so that's, to me, what worldview literacy is, and the Worldview Explorations Project is the curriculum that we've developed in order to teach this.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for having this project, putting it out there, and putting in the time and effort to make it happen, because as you talked about, there is a lot going on right now when it comes to suffering and ignorance and intolerance. So to have something like this that brings people together rather than, keeps them apart is absolutely essential, for us to work with healing, to work with, everything that's on our plate right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for joining us on the show today. And on behalf of the ARE and myself personally, just for doing what you do. Your life's work is truly inspiring, and it's just so needed right now. So we're honored to have you on the show, and thank you so much for having this wonderful conversation with us today.
Well, I'm looking forward to being with a group of seekers who are genuinely, questioning some of the assumptions that the culture has laid down for them, and being part of this conversation that I think is growing every day. So I appreciate very much what you're doing, and I look forward to meeting you.
Thank you. Absolutely. We look forward to having you at the ARE. Thank you so much, Dr. Marilyn Schlitz, for joining us today on Reflections. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Dr. Marilyn Schlitz is a presenter at the upcoming ARE conference here in Virginia Beach. And this conference is entitled Breakthroughs Towards a New Consciousness, Science, Spirituality, and the Limitless Mind. And this takes place from March 27th through the 29th. And her talk in particular is entitled Death Makes Life Possible. It includes a presentation, her film with Deepak Chopra, and a discussion following the viewing of the film. As always, you can register for this and other conferences at our website, edgarcayce.org/conferences. To learn more about Dr. Marilyn Schlitz and her amazing body of work, you can visit her website at marilynschlitz.com. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and of course MoreTalk.tv, I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, wishing everyone a beautiful week of accelerated growth and deepened understanding. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show, and we will see you next week. And now it is time for the Thought for the Day here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And joining me as always for the Thought for the Day is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections.
Hi, Brent. It's always a pleasure to be here. I really enjoy doing this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being on. And if you can go ahead and read the thought for the day today for our listeners.
I'd be happy to. This thought comes from reading 1183-3. No matter what others say or even do as you would be done by. And then the peace that has been promised is indeed your own. You know, the Cayce readings often talked about being channels of blessings to others. And what could be a better blessing than to offer peace to other people? You know, I feel like the peace of God is ours to know and to share with others. And it's almost, well, it is, I feel like it is our responsibility to go inside, experience that peace, so that we can offer to someone else. And maybe that offering is, it comes in not reacting to the situation and or reflecting, say, boy, if I was in that person's position, how would I want people to be? You know, there's so many ways that we take a look at this, you know, that golden rule of doing others unto others, the things we want done to us, the reaction we want from other people. But we have to take a breath, take a moment, say, okay, where am I going to go? You know, what am I going to offer to my brother, to my sister, to this fellow human being? How would I want to be acted upon? Not always easy to do in the heat of the moment, but it's there. The help is there to help us do it. If that's our desire, if that's our intent, that help will always be there for us.
Right. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I like this one for a number of reasons. This one also, as we've had previous thought for the days, this one's a bit poetic for me, especially the last sentence that says, "And then the peace that has been promised is indeed your own." I love that line because it's like putting the idea out there that who wouldn't want peace? It's the ultimate reward. And he clearly says that the best way to find that peace and to hold that peace is, like you said, to be of service to others. And what better way to be of service to others than to bring kind of, I call it a neutralizing energy. When people are lashing out and, like it says in the reading, no matter what others say or even do, when people are saying harsh words, they're speaking poorly about other people. It brings up another thing in the Cayce reading with gossip. Cayce says that he refers to gossip as sin. And I think that's a very powerful thing to remember, in that when people are speaking poorly of others and they want to indulge you in the gossip, I think the best thing to do is you have to think, would this person appreciate what I'm saying about them right now? And of course, the answer is always no. There is no gossip that is not going to hurt people, especially if they're bringing up, ill intent words. Um, and I think it's a beautiful thing because Cayce talks about how this peace is your own if you're able to work with this principle of whatever anybody else is doing around you. When they're trying to push your buttons, the most powerful tool you can bring into that interaction is to not feed in to that negative energy that they're throwing your way. And you find that it's truly, they're not aware of how much they feed off of this energy, because majority of people maybe in their life have fed off of that energy. So when they throw negativity their way, they're able to pull people to their level and allow them to indulge in that negativity. So if you're the person that, even with the powerful tool of silence, you just don't react to their negative energy. You just maybe nod your head and smile and say, you know, you're entitled to your own opinion, and I respect that opinion. That is an incredibly powerful tool, and what it does is it plants a seed in that person that will hopefully manifest and grow throughout their life, and they realize, you know, this one person, I remember they didn't react to me the way that everybody else did, and I really admired that in them. So maybe they were showing me that what I was doing is not in my best interest. I wasn't speaking from a high place, and I wasn't respecting everybody else and treating them, as Casey said, treating them the way that you would, you know, want yourself to be treated.
Well, you really bring up a good point there with the snowballing effect of the collective consciousness. That doesn't always go in a good direction. And we see that manifest so many times in this world, so many different situations. But if one individual can stop and say, no, that's not appropriate, that's not the way to go, that's not coming from a good spiritual place, from a good spiritual ideal, it can make all the difference. It can make all the difference. Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. It is always an honor and pleasure to have you on the show with me.
Oh, it's been great, Brent. Thank you again for having me. I look forward to next time.
Absolutely. I'll see you next week.
Take care. Have a great week.
Thanks. You too.